Good evening, study partners. We are studying Mishnah Shekalim, chapter 7. Tonight's lesson is dedicated to Zayin Nishmas, my mother of blessed memory, Mrs. Rivka Newbort, Rivka Basar Abrab Shleimei. Mois shenimtzu ben Ashkolim linedava. Coins that are found between shkolim. These are the shkolim that were the half shekel that were donated for each person that we've been discussing throughout the chapter. And nedava and donation kupas, pushkas. So we're talking about obviously in the Beis Hamikdash. So now we find money lying on the floor, and we don't know where it belongs. Korav l'shkalim, yiplu l'shkalim. The Mishnah tells us a novel idea here, and that is, if the coins that were found are located closer to the shkalim than they are to the nadava, to the donative pushkas, so then they go to shkalim. Linadava, if they're closer to the pushkas for the donations, yiplu linadava. Now, where does this idea come from? We have a similar idea in the Torah, where we have the Egla Arufa. Egla Arufa is a procedure where if a person is found slain in a field, talks about it in Parshas Shoftim, person is found slain in the field, and we don't know who killed him. So the halacha is that the elders go out and they measure the distance from where the slain body is found to the closest city. And once they find which the closest city is, then the elders of that city come out, and there's a whole procedure that takes place where a young calf is decapitated. Now, the point is that why do we measure to where the closest city is? It's because from a Torah perspective, this lends credibility that it belongs to there, that the dead body was coming from that particular city. So, based on this principle, the Mishnah is telling us that when you have monies that are found, so the first thing the first thing that we're going to look at, and this is based on the Chachamim, is the proximity to where it's located. It's not such a simple cut and dry idea, because there are other ideas called the parish miberuba parish, which there's a concept in halacha that wherever is separated comes from the majority. And in this case, the Chachamim disregard this idea in favor of proximity. Okay. Now, what happens? Mechza lemechza. What happens is we measure it and it's exactly in the middle. Yiplu linedava. So then it's going to go to the donative chest as opposed to the shkalim chest. Why is this? The donative chest is used, the funds from there are used to purchase oila sacrifices. Oila sacrifices are kulei lemizbeach. The entire sacrifice is placed on the altar, and the kohanim get nothing. That's considered the highest level of sanctity, where all of it is going to Hashem. Whereas the shkalim, we already spoke in previous chapters that the shkalim, they would go for all various sacrifices, and they would go for the upkeep of the city, and there was extras and extras going for various things, all of lesser sanctity than an ola sacrifice. And so therefore, when we have monies that were found in between, we don't know where it goes, so we go to the more strict designation, which is for the nadava. What about Beineitzim L'Levaina? What happens if we find funds between the logs and frankincense? So, where people who are buying logs, people who are buying frankincense, we don't know where these funds were supposed to go. So, Korav L'Eitzim, Yiblu L'Eitzim. So again, we use this principle of proximity. If it's closer to the wood, then we put it in the wood coffers. L'Levaina, if it was closer to the frankincense coffers, Yiplu L'Levaina, so then it falls to the frankincense coffers. Mechza la mechza. What happens if it's found in between? So Yiplu Levina, it goes to the frankincense. And again, here, there's going to be a reason for this. The reason is that wood is not actually a carbon itself, like frankincense. Wood is a hechsher carbon. It's a preparation. It's something that you need. It's an indispensable part of the carbon on the mizbeach, but it's not the carbon itself. And so therefore, what's more valuable? The carbon versus the logs. And so therefore, if monies are found in between, so we move the monies to the frankincense. Ben kinim legezli eila. What happens if the monies were found between the nest coffers and the gezli yona, young pigeon, gezli eila, young pigeon coffers? So karav lekinim, if it's closer, again, similar concept. Karav lekinim, if it's closer to the nest, yiplu lekinim. The gezli eila, if it's closer to the young pigeons, yiplu legezli eila. Mechza la mechza. What happens if it's in between? So yiplu legezli eila. So then we give it to the gezli eila. The gezli eila are always going to be ola sacrifices. These are birds that are always going to be ola sacrifices. And as we mentioned before, an ola sacrifice is going to be completely burnt on the altar. And so being that it's going to be completely burnt on the mizbeach, it takes precedence over the kinim, over the nests, because the nests sometimes are chatas offerings in which part of it goes to the kohanim. So it's not as the level of sanctity is lower. And as we're going to see soon, the Mishnah is going to spell it out. What about ben chulin l'maisa sheni? We have a pile of money that is chulin, non-consecrated money, regular money. And Maisa Sheni money. Maisa Sheni money was the rule with Maisa Sheni money. It had to be brought up to Yerushalayim. And those funds had to be used to purchase foods. And those foods were shared with people in Yerushalayim. And lots of poor people, and especially the Kohanim and the Leviim, would benefit from all of these funds that were concentrated in Yerushalayim that were used for food. So poor people would come up to Yerushalayim. People had lots of funds. And so they would give them out, these funds, they would give them out to people to use for food. So this has a higher level of sanctity than non-consecrated funds. So now, again, if the funds were found between a pile of money that was non-consecrated and a pile of money that was Maisa Sheni, so karav lachulin, yiplu lachulin. The Maisa Sheni, yiplu Maisa Sheni. If the funds are in closer proximity to the non-consecrated funds, we can safely assume that they belong there in that pile and we can move them over. If they're closer to the Maisa Sheni funds, then we're going to move them to the Maisa Sheni pile. Mechza la mechza, what do you think?
The Hachmer.
It's going to go to Maisa Sheni. Yiplu la Maisa Sheni. It's going to go to Maisa Sheni. Zaklo. Now the Mishnah spells it out. Zaklo. This is the general rule. We go over the rule that we're going to move it to the closest place, even when it's going to be ruling more leniently. So for example, the latest example, Chulin and Maisa Sheni. Obviously Chulin is much more lenient because now I can use these funds and I can take it home, I can do whatever I want with it. They're not restricted.
Isn't there a concept of Yad Hegdish El Yaina?
This is not, so here what we're saying is that Yad Hegdish, first of all, Maisa Sheni is not Hegdish. It's not the temple treasury. That's number one. So it wouldn't have that rule. Number two is that this is indeed what we're saying. That even though Maisa Sheni has a level of sanctity to it, we don't move the funds that we don't know where they belong to Maisa Sheni when they're in a situation when they're closer to the pile of However, mechza la mechza, whenever they're in between, whenever they're found in between these two piles, or in between these two coffers, we're always going to go to the more stringent designation. That's the rule. Now we're going to discuss in Mishnah Beis a different halacha. What happens if we find money in front of the animal dealers? These are dealers that sold animals in Yerushalayim. Now, if we find money in front of them, somewhere in this marketplace where they're selling animals in Yerushalayim, li'olam meiser, they're always going to be considered Meiser Sheni funds. regardless of what time of the year it is. Why is this? So we need to understand again what the Ma'aser Sheni process is. Ma'aser Sheni is all of the funds that were designated as Ma'aser Sheni, all of them have to be brought up to Yerushalayim and spent there. Now, if you have wealthy people, they come up for the three Chagim, the Shalosh Regalim. So let's say a guy comes up with his Ma'aser Sheni 10%. Let's say he comes up with $50,000. It's not an unheard of situation. It's very common. You have a rich person with lots of cattle, lots of things, lots of monies, and he switches those items into money. He has big fields into money. Now he brings this money. He has to use this money for what? For food in Yerushalayim. He comes with his family. How much food could one family possibly eat?
Not $50,000.
Not $50,000 worth. All right. Pick any number you want. Okay. Fill in the blanks. I'm just using a number 50,000. So what is he going to do with this money? So he could use it for food while he's there. But what's he going to do when he leaves? So what does he do? He takes the money and he finds all the poor people and all the Kohanim and the Leviim who are there and all the orphans and widows and everybody there that's there. He says, here, he starts handing out bills. And he says, take this money and use this money for food for yourself. So long as they're in Yerushalayim, it's acceptable. And he goes home. And where does he leave the money? He leaves the money there. So because even in a time when we're not in Shalosh Regalim, people who are buying animals, there's a high chance and a probable chance of that they're bringing monies that are designated as Ma'aser Sheni money. So therefore, in all scenarios during the entire year, we could assume, or we do assume, that monies that are found in the animal marketplace were monies that were designated for Ma'aser Sheni. What about Bahar Abayis? What about in the Har Abayis? So in the Har Abayis, it's chulin. All times. Even in the Shalosh Regalim. If we find money in the Har Abayis, it's going to be considered chulin, non-consecrated funds. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, you're not allowed to bring money belts onto the Har Abayis. You can only bring money in a discreet manner. So you could. Is
that a rule?
That's halacha. Yeah. You can't come on not with your shoes, not with your money belt. It's halacha. So now, what are you going to keep in your pockets? What are you going to What monies are you bringing up? The money you need for your hotel, the money that you need to not being big belts. You're keeping in your back pocket in a private way. Well, the big monies of the Ma'aser Sheni, you're going to leave somewhere else. What you're going to keep on you is going to be the few dollars that you need for your trip. So, regardless of when, even in the Shalosh Regalim, we could safely assume that the monies that are found were dropped out of somebody's pocket, and those are not the monies that are designated for Ma'aser Sheni. Plus, there's no one selling anything.
So here's a scenario: somebody loses money, and this is in the Gemara, right? Somebody loses money. Whatever happened to holding it for a certain amount of time?
Monies don't have simanim on them, generally speaking. That's a whole different discussion. We'll talk about that above the Metzia.
No, but if the guy comes in and he tells you exactly how much money he lost, does it matter?
It would have to have a proper siman. Again, this is a whole different Masechta. That's a Masechta's Bava Metzia. We will get to that in Mirz Hashem at the right time. But right now, we're not talking about those laws. We're talking about monies that don't have a siman. They're not placed in such a way that we can safely assume. Plus, on Har Abayis, no one's putting money down on Har Abayis.
No, so you said that somebody lost it.
Somebody lost money.
So the guy comes back 2 minutes later, says he lost it. But anyways.
So in any case, Bahar Abayis chulin. On Har Abayis, all times it's going to be non-consecrated. You find it, you can keep it. B'Yerushalayim. What about in general Yerushalayim? Not on Har Abayis, and also not in the animal market. So b'shas haregel, in the time of the Shalosh Regalim, Meiser, it's considered Meiser money. Because, again, there's such an influx of money at that time, monies that are found, the likelihood is that it is Ma'aser Sheni money.
So Yerushalayim was rich.
And in the rest of the days of the year, not in the time of the regel, of the festivals, chulin is considered non-consecrated monies. Gimel, Basa Shemitzah Azara. What happens if we find a piece of meat in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash? So we don't know what this is, what the designation is. So Eivorin Oiles, if it's big limbs that are uncut into pieces, so we could safely assume that it's an oila. And because it's an oila, we didn't bother to cut it into bite-sized pieces, into small pieces, so that anybody can eat, because no one's eating it. It's going on the altar. But if they were cut into smaller chunks, smaller pieces, then we can assume that they're chattos offering. And the reason why this is cut up is because the Kohanim are going to go ahead and eat it. So that's in the Azara, that's in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Birushalayim. If we find this in Yerushalayim, Zivchei Shlomim. So we can assume that they are Shlomim offering. Shlomim offering, the majority of the animal is eaten by the owner who brought the sacrifice. However, in either case, whether they're found in the Azara, whether they're found in the Yerushalayim, we can't actually eat any of these pieces. We have to, we make this designation that this is what they are, and then we wait until they're tuber tsurasei, until they lose their form, they rot, and then we take it out to the Beis HaSreifa. The reason is because there's serious violations that may be violated if we guess this wrong. A person who eats a part of an oila, for example, that's a chayiv kares. That's a serious I believe it's chayiv kares. In any case, it's a serious violation. Furthermore, what happens if we assumed it's an oila, but it really was a chatas? Now, there's a rule, you can't burn it before it's time. You can't just burn it. So the way we do is we put it aside, let it rot, and then in all cases, we have to take the safe road, in other words.
Interesting.
Once it rots, then we could send it to the pyre, to the place of burning.
What
Pyre. They had a place of burning where they had all sorts of psulei, mikdashim, all sorts of...
it was like their...
garbage dump.
No. It's kind of like what we do before Pesach.
Yeah, like the chametz.
No,
that's a better example. I like that better than garbage, because garbage is garbage, but chametz is not garbage. It's a rule. Okay.
Or it's like
Nimtza bagvulin. Here comes a whole other halacha. Nimtza bagvulin. What happens if you find limbs or chunks in the provinces, not in Yerushalayim? So Eivorim nevelis. So if it's a Jewish neighborhood, so Eivorim nevelis. If they're full limbs, we have to assume that they're nevelis. They are non-ritually slaughtered animals. They're not kosher, and that's why they were left to be in big limbs, because they were going to be thrown to the dogs.
At that time, there were people who weren't Jewish in Israel.
There were people who were not Jewish. There were Geirim. There's Geir v'Toshef. There's converts, and then there's the Toshef, the people who lived in Israel.
But
the indigenous people.
Oh.
They weren't indigenous. They were just people there.
Oh.
There's also, time in the Mishnah, Romans were there.
So
Greeks, Romans.
in any case,
Arabs.
so if they're big chunks, if they're big pieces, so we have to assume that the reason why that we didn't butcher them up into small pieces because they're not. It turned out the animal wasn't kosher, and we're going to give it to the dogs. And for dogs, we don't butcher meats in a fancy way. Chatichas, but if they're cut into smaller pieces, mutaris, we can safely assume that it came from a kosher person, kosher butcher, or a kosher home, and we can eat it. V'shas haregel.
It's a lot of meat finding meat.
V'shas haregel, and in the times of festivals, Shabbos and Meruba, when people didn't eat meat, lots of meat on a regular basis like they do today. Those days, meat was saved for a special occasion, but for a regel, for a festival, lots of people were cooking, were slaughtering lots of meats. And so in such a case, there's an abundance of meat. So perhaps we can assume also that this big chunk wasn't treif. It just, we didn't get to it yet because we're getting to a different part of the animal. There's a lot of meat being eaten. So af evarim mutarin. So even bigger chunks, even bigger limbs are mutter, and this is again from there. There's don't try this at home, but in Shulchan Aruch we talk about different rules. If there's 9 butchers, if there's 6 butchers that are kosher and 4 butchers that are not kosher, and then you find a piece of meat in the street, you don't know which butcher it came from. So there's our rules that have.
I like the one that says, if it says basar on it, you could assume it's basar kasher.
Dalit.
Hold on a second. They weren't worried about flies and stuff. They just found pieces of meat screwed about, and they're allowed to eat it.
Yeah, what do you mean flies? In every slaughterhouse, there's flies, lots of them, especially in the olden days.
Extra protein.
One of the miracles that took place in the Beis Hamikdash, one of the big, that there were no flies. There was no flies, but in the slaughtering area. This is recorded in the Perek as one of the 10 miracles that took place in the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah, there weren't flies there. Weren't flies.
It's
I
interesting.
wonder if that includes mosquitoes.
It's interesting that there are so many rules about what is permitted, what is not permitted, whereas today people are so careful with the meat they eat. They wouldn't even eat from certain butchers or certain hashgachas. And then back then, oh, you found it, it's on the floor, but it's a Jewish neighborhood, therefore, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, well.
I doubt that that's actually, it's probably the loosest of the loosest interpretations in the Mishnah, so people who aren't very careful are also...
Not exactly. Let's go further, because again, we're getting off topic. I mean, it's on topic, but I want to move forward. Dalet, an animal found roaming from Yerushalayim until Migdal Eder, which is a place, and in the same distance in all directions. Anybody have the distance? How far that was? If you can look that up.
It says 11 kilometers, 6.8 miles.
6.8 miles. Thank you. And for this distance in all directions, scharim, if you found a zachar, an animal that was a male, oiles, we designate it as an oiles sacrifice. In the keves, if it was female, zivchi shlamim, it would be designated as a shlamim sacrifice. Rabbi Yehuda says, if it was 30 days before Pesach, so if it was a fit animal to be for a Pesach offering, so the person who found it can now use this for his own Karban Pesach. It's a live animal.
Oh, for his own, okay.
Yeah, can use it for his own Karban Pesach. If somebody were to come afterwards and give him a simon that he was able to identify that it was his animal, so he pays him for the animal. Meanwhile, the animal, in general, in animals and things that eat, if you just hold on to them indefinitely, so then you're deducting. You can deduct the food that you pay the animal, that you give the animal from the person who owns it. So it's actually a chesed to use the animal, to get all the identifying signs, and then use it. And if a person comes and makes a claim, then you pay him the money. Otherwise,
But back then, all the animals were marked, right? They were branded, or
well,
Jewish.
not a
Jewish.
Karban Pesach.
Oh, yeah, right.
You can't move him.
Hey,
Maybe they had like leashes.
So wait a minute. So all the Jewish cattle was not.
I don't know how they branded them. I'm sure they had a system of branding,
Maybe
but it
painting
wasn't
them or
Spray painted.
not the ones that were going to go for karbonas.
Interesting.
But Rishoina in the beginning, we just said in the Mishnah before that if a person finds an animal roaming around within 6.8 miles of Yerushalayim, to the distance of Migdal Eder and similar, so what do we tell the person? You can't keep it. If it's a zachar, you got to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and it's used as an oila. If it's in a keva, you got to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and it's used and it's slaughtered for a shlamim sacrifices. So in the beginning, the guy shows up with this and he says, "I found it." So guess what? They grab something of his and they say, "Okay, give us money for the libations."
What?
Yeah, because he brought it. Now he's got to have libations. Who's going to pay for these libations?
That's drinks.
The oils and the wines and the flowers, based on whatever.
You mean they just robbed this guy?
No, rob him. This is he had the merit of finding it, so he's got to pay for the to get on the mizbeach. So what happened? People who didn't want to get stuck paying the bill, so they decided they saw an animal roaming the street.
Let it go.
They let it go. Hashavas Aveda is when it belongs to a Jew.
Yeah.
Not when it belongs to the Beis Hamikdash.
Cows mooing all over.
Leave it go.
So because we're in the proximity of Jerusalem, we assume that it's...
That's correct. You can't keep it for yourself. Yes. We assume that it's Kodesh. So now, whatever they do, they would leave it and walk away. What do I need this for? I'm going to go there, then they're going to grab my watch. Hey, sure, can I see that? I'm the Gizbar. Can I see that watch for a second? I take the watch? Okay, you'll get your watch back when you bring the...
I can't imagine there were no arguments.
Of course there were arguments. Hiskinu basting. So Bezdin made a takana. That all of the libations for these found animals would come from the public coffers. Exactly because there was no doubt arguments. What are you kidding me? I brought this, and next thing you know, you take my watch or whatever. Fill in the blanks.
Did they have kayanim that were like...
The guy was usually big.
Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, Shivat Varim. So now we're talking about, we went off topic for a second. We started discussing when the Bezdin made a certain takanas. So Shivat Varim Hiskinu Bezdin V'zeh Echad Mehem. Rabbi Shimon says that there were 7 things that Bezdin instituted, and this was one of them, that the monies should come from, for the libations, should come from the public coffers. A guy can send an animal for a sacrifice, for an olah, from Medina Sayyam, from overseas. Now, if he sent money, not actual libations, because libations we would not accept from a non-Jew, but monies to pay for these libations. So if he sent the animal with the monies for the libations, so krevim mishalei. So then we take those monies and we buy libations and we bring it for we use that for his sacrifice. Vim lav, but if not, krevim mishal tzibur. The Bezdin has instituted that the accompanying libations would come from the public coffers.
Interesting. Were non-Jews allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash?
No. They could send the carbon. V'chein, ger shemes, v'niach zvachim, a convert that dies and he leaves zvachim, sacrifices. So im yesh le'nesachim, if he has libations, krevim mishaloi. So we use the libations that he has, the flowers, the oils, the wines. We use it from him. Vim lav krevim mishal tzibur. And if not, we bring. He designated sacrifices. Those sacrifices need to be brought, and so the libations will be brought from the public coffers. Usnai bezdinu, and it's a stipulation of bezdin. Al kohen gadol shemes, on a kohen gadol that dies. Minchas krevim mishal tzibur. So now his flour offering be brought from the public treasury. Normally he would bring it from himself, but it goes in a unit of the morning and the afternoon. So
hold on a second. Explain this. He died, and he saw a minchah
so
offering.
We still have to before we appoint another kohen gadol.
He still has.
So we still have to bring a carbon mincha.
So who brings it? They appoint another kohen to do it.
Yeah. Even he dies, even though a successor has not yet been chosen. So we still have to bring...
Who chose the successor?
What? There's a whole process. That's, again, not for here either. So in any case, Rabbi Yehuda says that it comes from the Yorshim, from the heirs' money, not from the public coffers. And it was brought whole. Usually you bring a half in the morning and half in the afternoon. And here... it was all brought whole. Okay, Zayin. What another takana that the Bezdin stipulated. Bezdin is in charge of the monies, and they can decide what's Kodesh and what's not Kodesh, and what it can be used for, and when this is going to constitute Me'ilah, who has permission to use things, who doesn't have permission to use things.
The Bezdin can override rulings that has to do with the Beis Hamikdash.
Certain rulings. Ala melech v'ala eitzim. So when you donate salt and wood, so they accept it with the condition that the salt and the wood can be used for Kohanim's personal needs on their karbonos, on their sacrificial meats. So yes, Bezdin can stipulate that when you're donating monies, any donations that are accepted for a certain item. We're taking into account that when you're donating it, you're allowing for this use.
Interesting.
And so therefore there's no me'ilah. So let's read it inside. Ala melech v'ala eitzim. for the salt and for the wood, that the Kohanim may make use of it for their own personal use. Which means a Kohen's eating his Kodesh meats, he can use salt that's in the Beis HaMikdash for his personal meats. He can use the woods to cook up the meats. He can't use it for private meats, for his private lunch, but food that is being eaten from Kodesh, he can use these. Yala Pora. Also on the Pora, this is talking about the Pora Aduma, the red heifer, which is burnt and its ashes are used to purify people. That there shall be no me'ila on its ashes. Now, what does this mean? This means that according to Torah law, there is no me'ila on the ashes of the red heifer. The Chachamim saw that people were taking it lightly, and so because there was no me'ila punishments and penalties, so they put on a me'ila punishment. The Chachamim came later and said, you know what, we're going to take it off because people were then nervous to use it liberally, and that we want them to use it liberally, meaning to say that any time we have a suspicion that something is tamei or tumas meis, we need to use it, and we need to take the water, spritz it. We need to use this in many, many applications, and so therefore they withdrew this. The alakinim apsulis, sheyuvois mishel tzibur. Kinim were brought. These are bird offerings that were brought, and they were, I guess, they were brought into a big pile, and or a big box, and then they would bring the bird offerings. Now, what happens if one died, if one was puzzled? So now we don't know who brought this. So we have to replace it and say this is for whoever brought these kinim, because otherwise they're going to be mechusar kapara. They're going to be missing atonement. So now who's going to pay for these? So the Chachamim established that the public funds are going to pay for any puzzle of birds. Think about this. It's like modern day example. You have kaparas, and then you bring it to the slaughtering house, and there's out of 100 chickens, there's 2 that are dead. Oh. So now somebody's chickens are dead. So theoretically, if this was a Beis HaMikdash type of scenario, we got to worry about there are 2 chickens that are dead here. So if it was a Beis HaMikdash type scenario, we would have to have somebody bring 2 more chickens and donate those chickens to the poor.
So hang on a second. What do we do in kapara?
Today it's not the
garbage.
same thing. But I'm saying this is a similar idea. So in any case, so any bird offerings that become disqualified, we replace them from public funds. Rabbi Yesi says, whoever the supplier of the kinim offerings are, he has to replace the disqualified ones, and that is the cost of doing business with the Beis HaMikdash. We already spoke in previous chapters that the flour, the people who supply the flour, if the flour becomes wormy, he has to replace it. So doing business with the Beis HaMikdash, it involves a certain level of risk that it wouldn't ordinarily have. Yad Hegdish Yena, this is according to Rabbi Yesi, and the Hegdish always has the upper hand, and so therefore we're not going to use Hegdish monies to replace birds that became disqualified. Rather, the supplier who has been making money, he's the one who needs to take the loss. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us again next week for the final chapter of Shekalim. That will take place in Mirz Hashem at 8:30 p.m. next Wednesday.